The old mansion had stood vacant on the outskirts of town for decades, its grandiose architecture a stark contrast to the modern buildings that had sprung up around it. Locals often whispered about the place, its towering spires and Gothic facades casting long shadows that seemed to hold the secrets of time. The whispers spoke of untimely deaths and strange occurrences, but these rumors only added to its allure when it was announced that the old mansion would be reborn as an art gallery. On the night of the grand opening, the mansion was transformed. Warm light spilled from the tall, arched windows, and the gravel driveway was filled with the crunching of tires and the excited chatter of guests. A red carpet stretched from the entrance to the main gates, inviting visitors to step into a world of elegance and artistic splendor. Lydia Hart, the gallery curator, stood at the entrance, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd as she greeted the guests. Her enthusiasm for the event was palpable. She had spent years gathering rare and beautiful artworks, each piece with its own story, each chosen to complement the eerie beauty of the mansion. Tonight was the culmination of her life's work, and she was determined that it would be a night to remember. Inside, the mansion's grand hall had been transformed into a dazzling exhibition space. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the polished marble floors, and the walls were lined with an eclectic mix of paintings, sculptures, and other art pieces. Guests marveled at the artwork, their voices hushed in reverence as they admired the masterpieces. Among the guests were art critics, local celebrities, and curious townsfolk, all drawn by the promise of seeing the old mansion in its new glory. As they moved from room to room, they couldn't help but feel a slight chill in the air, as if the mansion itself were a living entity, watching their every move. In the center of the main gallery hung the evening's centerpiece, a collection of portraits from artists who had all met tragic, mysterious ends. Each portrait was a hauntingly beautiful depiction of the artist's inner turmoil, capturing a piece of their soul within the canvas. Lydia had carefully selected these pieces, intrigued by their dark histories and the emotions they evoked. As the evening progressed, guests began to notice subtle oddities. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper seemed to follow them as they moved through the rooms. Cold drafts sent shivers down their spines, despite the mansion's state-of-the-art heating system. Lydia brushed off their concerns with a polite smile, attributing the sensations to the mansion's age and the guests' overactive imaginations. However, not everyone was convinced. An older woman, her face lined with worry, approached Lydia. "I know this place," she said, her voice trembling. "My grandmother used to work here when it was still a home. She always said the spirits of those who died here never left. You should be careful, Miss Hart." Lydia nodded politely, but inwardly she dismissed the woman's warnings. She had heard the stories, but she was a woman of facts and figures, not superstition. To her, the mansion was a beautiful relic of the past, not a haunted house. As the night wore on, a sense of unease began to settle over the guests. A young couple, enchanted by a particularly striking portrait, stood transfixed before it. The man's hand slowly slipped from his partner's grasp as he leaned in closer, his eyes wide with fascination. "Did you see that?" he whispered. Her eyes, they moved. His partner laughed nervously, pulling him away. "You're imagining things," she said, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her own unease. Unbeknownst to the guests, shadows had begun to flicker and dance on the walls, moving independently of the light sources. The portraits seemed to pulse with a life of their own, their painted eyes following the guests' every movement. Lydia, busy ensuring everything ran smoothly, failed to notice the growing discomfort among the attendees. In a secluded corner of the gallery, an elderly man stood alone, staring intently at a portrait of a woman with sorrowful eyes. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "I'm so sorry, my love. I should have been there." His voice echoed softly, mingling with the hushed conversations and distant laughter. As midnight approached, Lydia took the stage to thank her guests for attending. She spoke of the mansion's history and the incredible art collection it now housed. Her speech was met with polite applause, but the atmosphere had shifted. The guests, once lively and animated, were now subdued and anxious to leave. Lydia's smile faltered as she sensed the change. She concluded her speech quickly, inviting the guests to enjoy the rest of their evening. But as she stepped down from the stage, a loud crash echoed through the hall. A large portrait had fallen from the wall, its glass frame shattered into 1,000 pieces. The guests gasped, their eyes wide with fear. Lydia rushed over, her heart pounding. As she reached the fallen portrait, she felt a sudden, icy chill wash over her. The portrait's subject, a young artist who had died under mysterious circumstances, seemed to stare up at her with a knowing, malevolent gaze. A cold wind swept through the hall, extinguishing the chandeliers and plunging the room into darkness. Panic erupted as guests scrambled for the exits, their footsteps echoing in the now eerie silence. Lydia stood frozen, her breath visible in the frigid air. She could hear faint whispers, growing louder and more insistent, surrounding her. "You should have listened," the old woman's voice echoed in her mind. "The spirits are restless." As the last guest fled the mansion, the front door slammed shut, trapping Lydia inside. She turned to face the darkened gallery, the portraits now barely visible in the dim moonlight. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices filled with anger and sorrow. Lydia took a step back, her heart racing. She had opened the gallery to celebrate art and history, but she had unknowingly awakened something far more sinister. The mansion was not just a place of beauty, it was a prison for tormented souls, and they had been waiting for someone to set them free. With a final blood-curdling scream, the mansion fell silent, its grand opening night ending in terror. The old mansion stood once more in darkness, a place of haunted memories and restless spirits, waiting for its next unwitting victims. The mansion remained eerily silent the next morning, the echoes of last night's terror still lingering in its corridors. Lydia awoke on the cold marble floor of the grand hall, her body aching and her mind clouded with confusion. She sat up slowly, her eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the tall windows. As the events of the previous night flooded back to her, she shuddered. The fallen portrait, the whispers, the panicked guests. Everything seemed like a terrible dream. She glanced around, noticing the shattered glass and the disheveled state of the gallery. The once pristine exhibition space now looked haunted and abandoned. Determined to understand what had happened, Lydia rose to her feet and began to inspect the gallery. She approached the fallen portrait, its subject's eyes still appearing to follow her every movement. Kneeling down, she carefully picked up the torn canvas, her fingers brushing against the cold, slick surface. A chill ran down her spine as she felt an inexplicable connection to the painting, as if the artist's sorrow had seeped into the very fabric of the artwork. The portrait depicted a young woman with dark, mournful eyes and flowing auburn hair. Her expression was one of deep sadness, and Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that the woman's gaze held a warning. She recalled the elderly man's words from the previous night. "I'm so sorry, my love. I should have been there." The connection between the guests and the paintings was undeniable, but Lydia needed answers. Leaving the gallery, Lydia made her way to the mansion's library, a vast room filled with dusty tomes and forgotten manuscripts. She hoped to find some record of the artists whose works now adorn the gallery's walls. As she pulled book after book from the shelves, she stumbled upon a worn, leather-bound journal. Its cover was embossed with an intricate pattern, and the pages inside were filled with elegant handwriting. The journal belonged to Victoria Ashcroft, the mansion's original owner and a renowned artist in her own right. Lydia's hands trembled as she turned the pages, reading about Victoria's life and the tragic events that had befallen her and her fellow artists. According to the journal, Victoria had hosted numerous artists at the mansion, offering them a sanctuary to create their masterpieces. However, many of these artists had met untimely deaths, their spirits forever trapped within their creations. One entry, dated shortly before Victoria's own mysterious death, caught Lydia's eye. "The spirits grow restless. They speak to me through their paintings, begging for release. I fear the curse of this mansion, for it holds their souls captive. I must find a way to set them free, or their torment will continue for eternity." Lydia's heart pounded as she read the words. The mansion was indeed cursed, a prison for the tormented souls of the artists who had died there. The paintings were not just works of art. They were vessels for the spirits, each one a window into a soul's suffering. Determined to uncover more, Lydia continued her research, delving into the histories of the artists whose works were displayed in the gallery. She discovered that each artist had died under tragic and mysterious circumstances. Some had been driven mad by their own creativity, while others had fallen victim to bizarre accidents. All of them, however, had a connection to the mansion and to Victoria Ashcroft. As the day wore on, Lydia felt the weight of the spirit's presence growing heavier. The mansion seemed to breathe with a life of its own, the walls whispering secrets and the air thick with sorrow. She could almost hear the artists' voices, pleading for her to understand their pain. In the afternoon, a group of concerned townsfolk arrived at the mansion. They had heard about the events of the previous night and wanted to ensure Lydia's safety. Among them was the elderly woman who had warned her before. Her name was Mrs. Hargrove, and she had lived in the town all her life. "Miss Hart," Mrs. Hargrove said, her voice filled with urgency, "you must leave this place. The spirits are not to be trifled with. My grandmother always said that the mansion was cursed, that the artists who died here were trapped by their own creations." Lydia shook her head, her resolve unwavering. "I can't leave. I need to understand what happened and find a way to help them. They're trapped, Mrs. Hargrove, and I believe Victoria Ashcroft was trying to set them free." Mrs. Hargrove sighed, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and pity. "Very well, but be careful, Miss Hart. The spirits are restless, and they won't hesitate to claim another victim." As night fell, Lydia prepared herself for another encounter with the spirits. She armed herself with Victoria's journal and a determination to uncover the truth. The mansion seemed to pulse with anticipation, the shadows growing longer and the whispers louder. Lydia made her way back to the gallery, her footsteps echoing in the silent halls. She could feel the presence of the spirits, their eyes upon her, watching and waiting. She stood before the fallen portrait, the young woman's gaze piercing her soul. "I'm here to help you," Lydia whispered, her voice trembling. "I will find a way to set you free." The air grew colder, and the whispers intensified, surrounding Lydia in a cacophony of voices. She closed her eyes, focusing on Victoria's journal and the clues it held. The answer was there, hidden within the pages, waiting to be discovered. As she opened her eyes, Lydia saw a faint, ghostly figure standing beside her. It was the young woman from the portrait, her expression one of sorrow and desperation. "Please," the spirit whispered, "find the truth and set us free." Lydia nodded, her resolve stronger than ever. She would not rest until she had uncovered the secrets of the mansion and freed the tormented souls trapped within its walls. The journey ahead would be perilous, but she was determined to see it through. The spirits of the past were restless, their whispers growing louder with each passing moment, and Lydia Hart was their only hope. The next day, the gallery remained closed to the public. Lydia spent the morning cleaning up the mess from the previous night, carefully rehanging the fallen portrait and sweeping away the shards of broken glass. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the sensation of unseen eyes following her every move. The air was thick with an almost tangible tension, making each breath feel heavy. In the afternoon, Lydia was joined by Samuel Price, a local historian and close friend. Samuel had been skeptical of the gallery's reopening, aware of the mansion's dark past. Still, his curiosity about the history and the strange occurrences outweighed his apprehension. "Lydia," Samuel greeted her as he entered the gallery, his expression a mix of concern and intrigue. "I heard about last night. Are you all right?" Lydia forced a smile, though her eyes betrayed her unease. "I'm fine, Samuel, but there's something going on here, something I need your help to understand." Samuel nodded, his eyes scanning the room, noting the careful placement of the artworks and the sense of unease that seemed to permeate the space. "What have you discovered?" Lydia led him to the library, where Victoria Ashcroft's journal lay open on a table. She recounted her findings about the artists and their tragic deaths, showing Samuel the passages that spoke of the restless spirits and the curse of the mansion. Samuel listened intently, his brow furrowed in thought. It's possible that these artists were somehow bound to their works through a powerful, supernatural force. If Victoria believed she could set them free, then there must be a way. As they delved deeper into the journal, Lydia and Samuel pieced together a plan. They needed to conduct a séance to communicate directly with the spirits and understand what bound them to the mansion. It was a risky endeavor, but Lydia was determined to uncover the truth. That evening, Lydia and Samuel prepared for the séance. They gathered candles, arranged them in a circle in the center of the gallery, and placed a small round table at its center. On the table, they laid out Victoria's journal and a few personal items that had belonged to the artists, hoping to strengthen the connection. As the last candle was lit, the room was bathed in a soft, flickering glow. The shadows danced on the walls, creating an eerie, almost hypnotic atmosphere. Lydia and Samuel took their seats at the table, their hands lightly touching, forming a closed circuit. Lydia took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "Spirits of this house, we seek to understand your pain. We wish to help you find peace. Please come forward and speak to us." For a moment, there was only silence, the air thick with anticipation. Then, slowly, the temperature in the room began to drop. A cold breeze swept through the gallery, causing the candles to flicker wildly. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch and twist, forming indistinct shapes that moved of their own accord. Lydia and Samuel exchanged a glance, their eyes wide with both fear and determination. "Stay focused," Samuel whispered, squeezing Lydia's hand reassuringly. Suddenly, the room was filled with a soft, almost musical whispering. It was as if a chorus of voices was speaking in unison, their words overlapping and creating a haunting melody. Lydia closed her eyes, straining to make out the individual voices. One voice stood out among the rest, a mournful, sorrowful tone that seemed to pierce through the cacophony. "Help us," it pleaded. "Release us from this torment." Lydia's heart ached at the desperation in the voice. How can we help you?" she asked, her voice trembling. The candles flickered again, their flames growing taller and brighter. The shadows on the walls coalesced into a single figure, the ghostly apparition of a young woman. It was the same woman from the fallen portrait, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and despair. "You must find the truth," the spirit said, her voice echoing through the gallery. "Uncover the secrets that bind us here. Only then can we be free." Before Lydia could respond, the apparition flickered and disappeared, leaving the room in an uneasy silence. The candles dimmed, and the temperature slowly returned to normal. Lydia and Samuel sat in stunned silence, the weight of the encounter heavy upon them. "We need to dig deeper," Samuel finally said, his voice filled with determination. "There's something here, something we're missing. We have to uncover the full story of what happened to these artists." Lydia nodded, her resolve stronger than ever. "We'll start tomorrow. We'll go through every record, every piece of history related to this mansion and its inhabitants. We will find the truth." As they extinguished the candles and prepared to leave for the night, Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The gallery, once a place of beauty and artistic expression, now felt like a living entity, its very walls whispering secrets and bearing witness to the suffering of the souls trapped within. The first encounter had been a chilling reminder of the task ahead. Lydia knew that the road to uncovering the mansion's dark secrets would be fraught with danger, but she was determined to see it through. The spirits were counting on her, and she would not let them down. As they left the mansion, the whispers of the past followed them, a haunting reminder of the souls still trapped within the gallery's walls. And Lydia knew that the true horror of the mansion was only just beginning to reveal itself. The morning sun cast long shadows over the mansion as Lydia and Samuel returned to continue their investigation. Armed with notebooks and determination, they headed straight to the library, where Lydia had gathered every document, letter, and newspaper clipping she could find about the artists whose works now hung in the gallery. The library was filled with an eerie stillness, as if the spirits themselves were waiting to reveal their stories. Lydia and Samuel sat at a large oak table, their research materials spread out before them. They began sifting through the records, piecing together the tragic histories of the artists. The first artist they investigated was Eleanor Cartwright, the young woman whose portrait had fallen on the night of the grand opening. Born into a wealthy family, Eleanor had shown exceptional talent from a young age. Her paintings, known for their emotional depth and haunting beauty, quickly gained acclaim. However, Eleanor's life was cut short when she was found dead in her studio, a victim of an apparent suicide. Yet there were whispers that her death was not self-inflicted, but rather the result of a curse tied to her final, unfinished work. Next was Marcus Blackwood, a reclusive painter who had spent his final years in the mansion. Marcus was known for his dark, brooding landscapes that seemed to capture the very essence of despair. He had lived as a recluse, rarely venturing outside his studio. One stormy night, Marcus was discovered dead, his body hanging from a rafter in his studio. His death was ruled a suicide, but those who knew him believed he had been driven mad by the spirits that haunted his artwork. As they delved deeper, Lydia and Samuel uncovered the story of Thomas Harrington, a sculptor whose life had been marred by tragedy. Thomas's wife and child had died in a fire, leaving him consumed by grief. He poured his anguish into his sculptures, creating pieces that seemed to weep with sorrow. Thomas had come to the mansion seeking solace, but instead, he found only more pain. He was found dead in his workshop, surrounded by his sculptures, his heart stopped as if he had been scared to death. The next artist was Isabella Winters, a brilliant but tormented artist known for her vivid, surrealist paintings. Isabella had been plagued by visions and nightmares, which she believed were premonitions of her own death. Her final piece, a disturbing self-portrait, seemed to foreshadow her demise. She was found dead in her studio, her body contorted in a grotesque manner, as if she had died in the throes of agony. Her death was never fully explained, adding to the air of mystery that surrounded her life and work. The last artist on their list was Jonathan Pierce, a charismatic and talented painter whose works were celebrated for their vibrancy and life. Jonathan had been the darling of the art world until he began to change. His last series of paintings were dark and unsettling, depicting scenes of torment and despair. Jonathan claimed to hear voices and see shadows moving within his studio. He was found dead, his throat slit with a razor, and his final painting, a horrific depiction of a tormented soul, was left unfinished. His death was ruled a suicide, but many believed that something darker had taken hold of him. As they pieced together these tragic histories, Lydia and Samuel noticed a pattern. Each artist had experienced intense suffering and had met a violent, unexplained end. Their final works seemed to hold the key to their torment, each piece imbued with a sense of anguish and despair that went beyond mere artistic expression. Lydia sat back, her mind racing. Each of these artists was in pain, and their deaths were all surrounded by mystery. What if their spirits are bound to their works because of the intense emotions they poured into them? Samuel nodded thoughtfully. It's possible. If their art became a vessel for their suffering, it could explain why their spirits are still here, trapped within these walls. Determined to find more concrete evidence, Lydia suggested they visit the rooms where the artists had died. She hoped that being in those spaces might reveal more about the curse that bound the spirits to the mansion. They started with Eleanor's studio, a small room on the second floor. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of oil paint lingered in the air. Lydia could almost hear the faint echo of Eleanor's sobs, her despair etched into the very walls. She knelt beside the spot where Eleanor had been found, closing her eyes and trying to feel any lingering presence. A sudden, icy breeze swept through the room, and Lydia shivered. She heard a faint whisper, barely audible, like the rustling of leaves. "Help us." The voice was so soft, so full of sorrow that it brought tears to Lydia's eyes. Next, they visited Marcus's studio, a dark and cluttered space filled with half-finished canvases and broken brushes. The atmosphere was oppressive, the air heavy with the scent of decay. Lydia could feel the weight of Marcus's despair, his tortured soul still lingering in the room. She touched one of his paintings, feeling a cold shiver run through her body. "Free us!" The whisper was louder this time, filled with a desperate plea. In Thomas's workshop, the sculptures seemed to watch them, their eyes following their every move. The room felt alive, as if the very walls were breathing. Lydia ran her fingers over one of the sculptures, feeling the anguish carved into the stone. "Release us!" The whisper was almost a scream, the pain palpable. Isabella's studio was a chaotic mess of vibrant colors and disturbing imagery. The paintings seemed to pulse with energy, each brushstroke a cry for help. Lydia felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of fear, her heart racing. "End our suffering." The whisper was a command, urgent and insistent. Finally, they visited Jonathan's studio, a room that felt both vibrant and dark. The unfinished painting on the easel seemed to come alive, the eyes of the tormented soul staring directly at Lydia. She felt a connection, a bridge between their worlds. "Find the truth." The whisper was clear, almost spoken directly into her ear. Exhausted and overwhelmed, Lydia and Samuel returned to the library. The spirits had spoken, their voices a chorus of pain and desperation. They were bound by their suffering, trapped within the walls of the mansion, waiting for someone to uncover the truth and set them free. Lydia looked at Samuel, her eyes filled with determination. "We have to find out what really happened to them. We need to understand the full extent of this curse and how we can break it." Samuel nodded, equally resolute. "Agreed. We need to dig deeper, uncover every hidden secret of this mansion. Only then can we hope to free these spirits and put an end to their suffering." As they prepared for another night in the haunted mansion, Lydia couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. The spirits were growing more restless, their whispers more insistent. The truth was there, hidden within the shadows of the past, waiting to be discovered. And Lydia was determined to find it, no matter the cost. Night fell once more, casting the mansion into deep shadows and eerie silence. Lydia and Samuel were joined by a group of skeptics, investigators, and paranormal enthusiasts who had heard of the strange events and were eager to either debunk the claims or prove them true. They arrived with cameras, recording devices, and other equipment, ready to document whatever the night might reveal. The group gathered in the grand hall, their faces a mix of excitement and apprehension. Lydia briefed them on the history of the mansion and the tragic fates of the artists whose spirits were said to haunt the gallery. She showed them Victoria Ashcroft's journal, emphasizing the connection between the artists' suffering and their untimely deaths. "We're not here just to investigate," Lydia said, her voice steady but firm. "We're here to understand and, if possible, to help these spirits find peace. Please remember that." The investigators nodded, some more skeptically than others. As they began setting up their equipment, Lydia felt a chill in the air, a sign that the spirits were already aware of their presence. The group split into pairs, each assigned to a different part of the mansion. Lydia and Samuel stayed together, taking the central gallery, where most of the activity had been reported. They positioned themselves near Eleanor's portrait, the air around it feeling colder and heavier. As the night wore on, the investigators started to experience strange phenomena. In the north wing, where Marcus Blackwood's studio was located, 2 investigators reported seeing shadowy figures flitting across the walls. Their equipment picked up strange, indecipherable whispers that seemed to come from all directions. In Thomas Harrington's workshop, another pair felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow and despair. One investigator, a tough, no-nonsense man, was brought to tears as he stood before one of Thomas's weeping sculptures. His partner, a woman known for her skepticism, admitted to feeling a sudden, inexplicable chill that made her hair stand on end. Isabella Winter's studio proved to be the most active. The vibrant, surrealist paintings seemed to pulse with energy, and the room felt alive with a chaotic, almost malevolent presence. The investigators there captured several instances of disembodied voices on their recorders, some pleading for help, others warning them to leave. In Jonathan Pierce's studio, the unfinished painting of the tormented soul became a focal point for activity. The eyes in the painting seemed to follow the investigators, and one of them claimed to see the figure's mouth move, whispering the word truth. Their video equipment malfunctioned repeatedly, the screens filled with static whenever they tried to focus on the painting. Back in the central gallery, Lydia and Samuel sat in the cold silence, their breath visible in the frigid air. The candlelight flickered, casting long dancing shadows on the walls. Lydia held Victoria Ashcroft's journal tightly, feeling the weight of the spirit's desperation. Suddenly, the air grew even colder, and the faint sound of footsteps echoed through the gallery. Lydia and Samuel looked around, their eyes wide with anticipation. The other investigators had reported similar sounds, but this felt different, closer, more personal. A ghostly figure materialized before them, the apparition of a young woman with sorrowful eyes and flowing auburn hair. It was Eleanor, her expression filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "Help us," she whispered, her voice echoing softly through the room. "Find the truth. Set us free." Lydia felt a lump in her throat as she nodded. "We're trying, Eleanor. We want to help you, but we need to understand what happened to you all." Eleanor's figure flickered, her eyes filled with pain. "Victoria tried to help us. She knew the truth, but it was too late for her." Lydia's heart raced. What truth, Eleanor? What did Victoria know? Before Eleanor could answer, a sudden violent gust of wind swept through the gallery, extinguishing the candles and plunging the room into darkness. Lydia felt a cold hand brush against her arm, and she shivered. The air was filled with whispers, louder and more insistent than before. "Find the truth," the voices echoed, overlapping and creating a haunting chorus. "Set us free." The room felt like it was closing in on them, the darkness pressing against their senses. Lydia fumbled for a flashlight, her hands trembling. She finally managed to turn it on, the beam cutting through the darkness and illuminating the worried faces of the other investigators who had rushed into the gallery. "What happened?" one of them asked, his voice tinged with fear. Lydia took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "The spirits are growing more desperate. They want us to find the truth about their deaths. We need to focus on Victoria Ashcroft and what she discovered." Samuel nodded in agreement. "We need to find any hidden records, letters, or anything that might give us more insight. Victoria knew something crucial, and it might be the key to breaking the curse." The group reconvened, sharing their experiences and the evidence they had gathered. The skeptics were now convinced that something supernatural was indeed happening within the mansion. With renewed determination, they decided to spend the rest of the night searching for any hidden clues that Victoria might have left behind. As the investigators dispersed once more, Lydia felt a renewed sense of purpose. The spirits were counting on them to uncover the truth and set them free. The night was far from over, and the mansion still held many secrets. Lydia knew that they were on the right path, but the journey ahead would be fraught with danger and challenges. The whispers of the past had grown louder, their urgency impossible to ignore. Lydia and her team would need to dig deeper, face the darkness head-on, and unravel the mysteries that bound the spirits to the mansion. Only then could they hope to bring peace to the tormented souls and end the haunting of the ghostly art gallery. The early hours of the morning found Lydia, Samuel, and the other investigators combing through the mansion in search of hidden records or any other clues that might shed light on Victoria Ashcroft's findings. The atmosphere was thick with tension, each creak of the floorboards and flicker of candlelight heightening their senses. The mansion seemed to be alive, watching their every move. Lydia and Samuel made their way to the attic, a place that had been largely untouched for years. Dust motes danced in the beams of their flashlights as they climbed the narrow, creaking staircase. The air grew colder the higher they went, and Lydia shivered as they reached the attic door. "Do you think we'll find anything up here?" Samuel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I hope so," Lydia replied, pushing the door open with a creak. "It's one of the few places we haven't searched yet." The attic was cluttered with old furniture, trunks, and forgotten relics. The shadows cast by their flashlights created eerie shapes on the walls, and Lydia could almost feel the presence of the spirits watching them. They began sifting through the piles, searching for anything that might provide a clue. Meanwhile, in the north wing, two investigators, Karen and Jake, were experiencing phenomena of their own. As they walked through Marcus Blackwood's studio, the air grew colder, and their breath became visible. The paintings on the walls seemed to shimmer, the dark landscapes coming alive in the flickering candlelight. "Do you feel that?" Karen asked, rubbing her arms to ward off the chill. Jake nodded, his eyes fixed on one of the paintings. "It's like the room is breathing. Look at the painting. Do you see it moving?" Karen squinted at the canvas, her heart pounding as she realized that the shadows in the painting were indeed shifting, as if alive. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the room as an easel toppled over, sending a canvas flying across the floor. They both jumped, their flashlights shaking in their hands. "We need to get this on camera," Jake said, fumbling with his equipment. But as he aimed the lens at the painting, the camera malfunctioned, the screen filled with static. The room grew darker, and they could hear faint whispers growing louder, filling the air with a sense of urgency and despair. In Thomas Harrington's workshop, two more investigators, Michael and Lisa, were having a similarly unsettling experience. The sculptures seemed to move in the dim light, their eyes following the pair as they walked around the room. Lisa felt a hand brush against her back, causing her to spin around, but no one was there. "Did you touch me?" she asked, her voice shaky. Michael shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. "No, I didn't. But I felt something too." The room suddenly grew colder, and a low moan echoed through the space, coming from the direction of Thomas's largest sculpture, a weeping angel. The angel's stone eyes seemed to weep real tears, the liquid glistening in the candlelight. The whispers in the room grew louder, the voices overlapping in a cacophony of sorrow and desperation. In Isabella Winter's studio, the air was electric with energy. The surrealist paintings pulsed with a life of their own, the colors shifting and changing before the investigators' eyes. One painting, in particular, caught their attention. A self-portrait of Isabella, her eyes wide with terror, as if seeing something unspeakable. "We need to document this," one of the investigators said, but as they raised their camera, it too malfunctioned, the screen flickering and going dark. The room seemed to close in on them, the walls pressing closer, the air thick with tension. The investigators could hear Isabella's voice, clear and urgent. "End our suffering. Find the truth." Back in the attic, Lydia and Samuel were making progress. They found a hidden compartment in one of the old trunks, revealing a stack of letters and a leather-bound book. The letters were from Victoria Ashcroft, written to a close friend in the weeks leading up to her death. The book was a detailed journal of her final days, documenting her attempts to understand and break the curse. Lydia carefully opened the journal, her fingers trembling as she read Victoria's final entry. "The spirits are restless. I fear I am running out of time. The mansion holds many secrets, and I am close to uncovering the truth. The curse that binds these poor souls is tied to a dark ritual, one that I must undo. If I fail, their suffering will continue for eternity. I pray that someone will continue my work if I cannot." Samuel looked over her shoulder, his expression grim. "We need to find out more about this ritual. It might be the key to breaking the curse." As they continued to read, the temperature in the attic dropped further, and the whispers grew louder. Lydia could feel the spirits closing in, their presence almost tangible. She knew they were running out of time. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the attic as an old mirror fell from the wall, shattering into pieces. The shards scattered across the floor, reflecting the dim light in a chaotic pattern. Lydia felt a cold hand on her shoulder, and she turned to see the ghostly figure of Victoria Ashcroft standing beside her. "Help us," Victoria whispered, her voice filled with sorrow. "Find the ritual, end our suffering." Lydia nodded, her resolve stronger than ever. "We will, Victoria. We will find the truth and set you free." With renewed determination, Lydia and Samuel gathered the letters and the journal, ready to share their findings with the others. As they descended the stairs, the mansion seemed to pulse with anticipation, the whispers growing louder, urging them on. The night was far from over, and the true horror of the mansion was only beginning to reveal itself. The spirits were desperate for release, and Lydia knew that they had to uncover the dark secrets of the past to bring peace to the tormented souls trapped within the ghostly art gallery. The atmosphere in the mansion was thick with tension as Lydia and Samuel regrouped with the other investigators in the grand hall. Each team shared their unnerving experiences, confirming that the spirits were indeed growing more restless. The discoveries in the attic weighed heavily on Lydia's mind, but she knew they were closer to finding the truth. Lydia laid out Victoria Ashcroft's journal and letters on the table, detailing her findings to the group. The investigators listened intently, their earlier skepticism replaced by a shared sense of urgency. They had to uncover the ritual that bound the spirits and find a way to undo it. As Lydia finished explaining, the air grew colder and the candles flickered. The investigators exchanged nervous glances, and then, as if summoned by their collective fear, the spirits began to manifest more aggressively. A loud crash echoed through the hall as a sculpture toppled over, its broken pieces scattering across the floor. The paintings on the walls seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, their subjects' eyes following the group's every move. Shadows danced and twisted, creating grotesque shapes that seemed to reach out towards the investigators. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness as a chilling wind extinguished the candles. Lydia fumbled for her flashlight, her hands trembling. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing ghostly figures materializing before them. Eleanor, Marcus, Thomas, Isabella, and Jonathan stood before the group, their expressions filled with anger and sorrow. The air was thick with their collective pain, and Lydia could feel their desperation. "Why have you disturbed our rest?" Marcus's voice was a low, mournful wail. "We're here to help you," Lydia replied, her voice shaking. "We want to understand what happened and how to set you free." Thomas's ghost stepped forward, his face twisted with rage. "Help us! You seek to profit from our suffering, displaying our pain for your own gain." The accusation hung in the air, and Lydia felt a pang of guilt. The gallery had indeed brought attention to their stories, but at what cost? "We didn't know," Samuel said, his voice steady. "We didn't understand the depth of your torment, but now we do, and we want to help." Isabella's ghost, her eyes wide with terror, pointed a trembling finger at Lydia. "Victoria tried to help us, but she failed. You must not fail, or our suffering will continue forever." Lydia nodded, her resolve firm. "We found Victoria's journal. She mentioned a dark ritual that binds you here. We need to know more about it. How can we break the curse?" Jonathan's ghost, the most recent of the tragic artists, stepped forward. "The ritual was performed by someone close to Victoria, someone who sought to control us through our art. The mansion itself is a conduit, a prison that holds our souls captive." Eleanor's voice was a soft, sorrowful whisper. "The key lies in the heart of the mansion, in the room where the ritual was performed. Find the room, and you will find the means to end our suffering." The spirits began to fade, their forms becoming less distinct. "Hurry," Isabella urged. "The longer you wait, the stronger the curse becomes." As the ghosts vanished, the lights flickered back on, revealing the shaken faces of the investigators. Lydia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the spirit's plea. They had to find the ritual room and uncover the truth before it was too late. "We need to search the mansion again," Lydia said, her voice filled with determination. "There's a hidden room, the heart of the mansion, where the ritual was performed. That's where we'll find the answers we need." The group split up once more, scouring the mansion for any hidden doors or passageways. The tension in the air was palpable, each creak of the floorboards and whisper of the wind setting their nerves on edge. Lydia and Samuel made their way to the mansion's basement, a labyrinth of dark, narrow corridors. The air was damp and musty, and the walls seemed to close in around them. They searched every nook and cranny, feeling along the walls for any hidden mechanism that might reveal a secret passage. Finally, in a dark corner of the basement, Samuel's hand brushed against an uneven stone. He pressed it, and with a low, grinding noise, a section of the wall slid open, revealing a hidden staircase leading down into the darkness. "This must be it," Samuel said, his voice filled with both excitement and dread. Lydia nodded, her flashlight casting long shadows as they descended the stairs. The air grew colder with each step, the oppressive darkness pressing in around them. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a large circular room. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and in the center of the room was an ornate altar. On the altar lay a book bound in dark leather, its pages filled with arcane writings. "This is it," Lydia whispered, stepping forward. "This is where the ritual was performed." As they approached the altar, the air grew colder still, and the symbols on the walls seemed to glow with a faint, eerie light. Lydia picked up the book, carefully turning the pages. The text detailed a dark ritual designed to bind the souls of the artists to their creations, using the mansion as a conduit. "We need to perform a counter-ritual," Samuel said, reading over her shoulder. "Something that will reverse the spell and free their souls." Lydia nodded, her mind racing. "We need the others. We'll need all the help we can get." They hurried back up the stairs, gathering the other investigators and explaining what they had found. Together, they returned to the hidden room, their faces set with determination. As they began to prepare for the counter-ritual, the mansion seemed to come alive with malevolent energy. The walls shook, and the air was filled with whispers and cries. The spirits were desperate, their torment reaching a fever pitch. Lydia read aloud from the book, her voice strong and clear despite the chaos around them. The investigators formed a circle, holding hands and focusing their energy on breaking the curse. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, and a cold wind swept through the room. The air was filled with a deafening roar, the spirits' cries of anguish and hope merging into one. As Lydia reached the final words of the ritual, a blinding light filled the room, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The energy reached a crescendo, and then, with a final, piercing scream, everything went still. The oppressive cold lifted, and the room was filled with a warm, peaceful light. The symbols on the walls faded, and the book in Lydia's hands disintegrated into dust. "It's done," Lydia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We did it. They're free." As they made their way back up to the main hall, the mansion felt different, lighter, more serene. The oppressive weight of the spirit's suffering had lifted, replaced by a sense of peace. The paintings and sculptures in the gallery no longer pulsed with malevolent energy. The eyes of the portraits, once filled with sorrow and anger, now seemed at peace. Lydia and Samuel stood in the grand hall, their hearts filled with relief. The spirits had found their release, and the mansion was no longer a prison for their tormented souls. But as they left the mansion, Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was not yet over. The truth had been uncovered, but the memories of the past would linger, a haunting reminder of the pain and suffering that had once filled the ghostly art gallery. The sense of peace that had settled over the mansion was short-lived. As Lydia and the investigators returned to the main hall, a deep, resonant thud echoed through the mansion, as if the building itself were drawing a final, ominous breath. The once peaceful air grew thick with an almost palpable dread, and the temperature plummeted once more. "We need to get out of here," Samuel said urgently, glancing around at the flickering shadows that danced on the walls. "I don't think the mansion is going to let us go that easily." The investigators nodded, fear etched into their faces. They hurried toward the grand entrance, only to find the massive oak doors firmly shut. Lydia pushed and pulled, but they wouldn't budge. The air grew colder still, and the whispers returned, more insistent and desperate than ever. "Find the truth. Release us." The voices echoed, overlapping and creating a disorienting cacophony. Lydia's heart pounded as she looked around, searching for another way out. "There has to be another exit. We need to find it, and fast." The group split up, each pair taking a different direction in search of an escape route. Lydia and Samuel headed back toward the basement, hoping the hidden stairway they had found earlier might lead to another exit. As they descended into the darkness once more, the oppressive cold grew more intense, and the walls seemed to close in around them. In the north wing, Karen and Jake retraced their steps through Marcus Blackwood's studio. The paintings seemed to come alive with malevolent energy, the dark landscapes shifting and twisting in the flickering light. They felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if the very walls were watching them. "We need to find a window or something," Karen said, her voice trembling. "Anything to get out of here?" Jake nodded, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of an escape. They found a small, narrow window near the ceiling, but it was too high to reach without a ladder. Desperation clawed at their minds as the whispers grew louder, urging them to find the truth. In Thomas Harrington's workshop, Michael and Lisa were experiencing their own terrors. The weeping sculptures seemed to reach out toward them, their stone eyes filled with sorrow. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the temperature continued to drop. "There must be another way out," Michael said, his breath visible in the frigid air. "We can't stay here." Lisa nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "Let's check the storage rooms. Maybe there's a service entrance or something." As they hurried through the narrow corridors, the mansion seemed to twist and change around them, the shadows growing darker and more menacing. The air was filled with the echoes of their footsteps and the relentless whispers of the spirits. Back in the basement, Lydia and Samuel reached the hidden room where they had performed the counter ritual. The altar lay in ruins, the book reduced to dust. The symbols on the walls had faded, but the sense of dread remained. "We need to find a way out of here," Lydia said, her voice filled with determination. "The spirits are still restless. We haven't finished this." Samuel nodded, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of an exit. "There has to be another passageway, something we missed." As they searched the room, Lydia noticed a faint, almost imperceptible draft coming from behind one of the walls. She pressed her hands against the cold stone, feeling for any irregularities. Finally, she found a hidden latch and pulled it, revealing another narrow staircase leading upward. "This way," she said, her voice urgent. "I think this might lead to an exit." They ascended the stairs, the cold air growing more intense with each step. The whispers seemed to follow them, growing louder and more desperate. Lydia felt a sense of impending doom, as if the mansion itself were fighting to keep them trapped. As they reached the top of the stairs, they found themselves in a small, dark room with a single door. Lydia pushed it open, revealing a narrow corridor that led to a side entrance of the mansion. The door was old and rusted, but it yielded to their combined efforts, creaking open to reveal the cold night air. "We found an exit!" Lydia called out, her voice echoing through the mansion. The other investigators, hearing her call, hurried toward the sound of her voice. One by one, they emerged from the darkness, their faces filled with relief. As they gathered near the side entrance, the air grew colder still, and the whispers reached a fever pitch. "You cannot leave. Find the truth. Release us." Lydia turned to face the mansion, her heart heavy with the weight of the spirit's plea. "We will find the truth," she whispered. "We will set you free." With a final, collective effort, the investigators pushed open the side door and stepped out into the night. The cold air hit them like a physical force, and they stumbled out onto the gravel driveway, gasping for breath. As they moved away from the mansion, the oppressive sense of dread began to lift. The whispers faded, replaced by the sounds of the night. The mansion stood silent and dark behind them, a looming reminder of the horrors they had faced. "We did it," Samuel said, his voice filled with relief. "We made it out." Lydia nodded, her eyes still fixed on the mansion. "But it's not over. We need to find out what really happened here. The spirits are still trapped, and we need to uncover the full truth to set them free." The investigators agreed, their faces filled with determination. They had survived the night, but their journey was far from over. The mansion held many secrets, and they would not rest until they had uncovered the truth and brought peace to the tormented souls trapped within the ghostly art gallery. As they walked away from the mansion, Lydia felt a renewed sense of purpose. The horrors they had faced had only strengthened her resolve. The truth was out there, hidden within the shadows of the past, and she was determined to find it, no matter the cost. In the days following their harrowing escape, Lydia and Samuel, along with the other investigators, worked tirelessly to uncover the final pieces of the puzzle. They pored over historical records, interviewed locals, and examined every detail of Victoria Ashcroft's journal and letters. The pieces were slowly coming together, revealing a chilling truth that had been buried for decades. One evening, as Lydia sat in her study, surrounded by stacks of old documents, she came across a letter that sent a shiver down her spine. It was from Victoria Ashcroft to a close friend, written shortly before her death. The letter spoke of a betrayal, a dark force that had been manipulating the artists and using their suffering for its own gain. "My dearest friend," the letter began, "I fear that I have uncovered a terrible truth. The one who brought the artists to my mansion, who promised them a haven for their creativity, was not who they seemed. They performed a dark ritual, binding the artists' souls to their works and trapping them within these walls. I must find a way to undo this evil, but I am running out of time. If I fail, promise me you will continue my work and set them free." Lydia's heart raced as she read the words. The true mastermind behind the artist's suffering was someone close to Victoria, someone who had used the mansion and its history for their own dark purposes. She knew she needed to share this revelation with Samuel and the others immediately. That night, the group gathered in Lydia's study, the air thick with anticipation. Lydia read the letter aloud, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. As she finished, the room fell silent, the weight of Victoria's words hanging heavily in the air. "We need to find out who this person was," Samuel said, his voice filled with determination. "They're the key to breaking the curse once and for all." The group agreed, their resolve stronger than ever. They began to cross-reference Victoria's letters with other historical records, looking for any mention of someone who might fit the description. As the hours passed, a name began to surface repeatedly. Alexander Marlowe, a wealthy patron of the arts. Alexander had been a prominent figure in the art world, known for his eccentric tastes and deep pockets. He had funded many artists and their projects, often inviting them to stay at Victoria's mansion. But his interest in the artists had not been purely altruistic. According to the records they found, Alexander had a fascination with the occult and had been rumored to dabble in dark rituals. "He's the one," Lydia said, her voice trembling with anger. "He's the one who performed the ritual and trapped the artists' souls here." Samuel nodded, his face grim. "We need to find out more about him. There must be something that can help us undo what he did." Their research led them to an old, abandoned estate on the outskirts of town, once owned by Alexander Marlowe. The estate had fallen into disrepair, its grandeur lost to time and neglect. The investigators gathered their equipment and set out for the estate, hoping to find the final piece of the puzzle. The estate was a sprawling labyrinth of crumbling hallways and dark, musty rooms. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the floorboards creaked under their weight. As they explored the house, they felt a growing sense of unease, as if they were being watched. In the library, hidden behind a false panel, they found a hidden room. The walls were lined with books on the occult, and in the center of the room was an altar similar to the one they had found in the mansion. On the altar lay a leather-bound book, its pages filled with detailed descriptions of dark rituals. Lydia carefully opened the book, her fingers trembling as she turned the pages. The final pages contained the ritual that had bound the artists' souls to their works, along with detailed instructions for reversing the spell. The counter-ritual required the original artifacts used in the binding ritual, personal items from each of the artists, which had been used to tie their souls to the mansion. "We need to find these artifacts," Lydia said, her voice filled with urgency. "They're the key to breaking the curse." The investigators searched the estate, finding each artifact hidden away in various rooms. Eleanor's paintbrush, Marcus's palette knife, Thomas's sculpting chisel, Isabella's easel, and Jonathan's sketchbook. Each item was imbued with a sense of sorrow and desperation, the weight of the artist's suffering palpable. With the artifacts in hand, the group returned to the mansion. The air was thick with anticipation as they prepared to perform the counter-ritual. They gathered in the hidden room in the basement, placing the artifacts on the altar. Lydia began to recite the counter-ritual, her voice steady despite the oppressive cold that filled the room. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, and the air hummed with energy. The investigators formed a circle, holding hands and focusing their energy on breaking the curse. As Lydia reached the final words of the ritual, the ground trembled, and a blinding light filled the room. The air was filled with the deafening roar of the spirits' cries, their voices merging into one. The artifacts on the altar began to glow, and the oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a warm, peaceful light. The room fell silent, and the symbols on the walls faded. The artifacts lay still on the altar, their power spent. Lydia felt a sense of peace wash over her. The weight of the spirit's suffering finally lifted. "It's done," Lydia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "They're free." As they made their way back to the main hall, the mansion felt different, lighter, more serene. The oppressive weight of the spirit's suffering had lifted, replaced by a sense of peace. The paintings and sculptures in the gallery no longer pulsed with malevolent energy, their subjects' eyes at peace. Lydia and Samuel stood in the grand hall, their hearts filled with relief. The spirits had found their release, and the mansion was no longer a prison for their tormented souls. As they left the mansion for the final time, Lydia felt a sense of closure. The horrors they had faced had brought them together, their determination and resolve stronger than ever. The truth had been uncovered, and the spirits had found peace. The ghostly art gallery was no more, but the memories of the past would linger, a haunting reminder of the pain and suffering that had once filled its walls. Lydia knew that they had done the right thing, and as they walked away from the mansion, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey had been long and arduous, but they had succeeded. The spirits were free, and the mansion could finally rest. The truth had been uncovered, and the darkness had been dispelled. Lydia and her friends could move forward, knowing they had brought peace to the tormented souls and ended the haunting of the ghostly art gallery.